Hey everyone, and this is going to be your second lecture in this intro level graphic design class called Colorspaces, Logos, and Styles. As always, you can download the PDF in the link in the description, and I encourage you to do that. That way you can view some of the sources because I have linked where I've gathered all of the images from in the sources below each slide. I do ask that you don't distribute my lecture to anyone else. This is for you to learn for this class. Let's get started. First up, we're going to talk about the difference between these two color spaces and why that's important in graphic design. So what types of color do we work with in digital space? The first type is RGB. RGB, that's red, green, blue, is used for digital screens like computers, TVs, and smartphones. It's an additive color module, and these are created by combining light. So you're actually mixing light colors when you're creating artwork on design programs on the screen. So as you can see, as we cross over the red, green, blue model, there in the middle of the triangle is a white light. So the main difference between RGB and CMYK is what we get when we combine the colors. So if we combine all the colors in light, we get white. Whereas in CYMK, we get black when we combine all of the colors. So C, it stands for cyan, for magenta, Y for yellow, and then K for black. So this model is used for printing, and it is called subtractive color because all of the colors combined create black. This is as opposed to additive color, where all of the colors add up to white. And so that's the main two differences to think about in your color models. Another thing that you might want to note is when you create something in RGB and you convert it to CMYK, you will deal with some problems with all of those colors. One of the most common problems that you'll deal with when you're switching from RGB to CMYK is the mixing of your blues in particular and reds in particular is always going to be a little different. And that's because of this difference between the way that it processes the color magenta. You don't have to think about this too much. What I usually do when I'm taking my work from RGB space into a CMYK space is I will bump the saturation of the blues and the reds specifically, and I'll also bring that mid-range up in levels. All right. So the key difference is RGB is light, CMYK is for print. And knowing the difference ensures your colors are going to look correct in their intended medium. Now, let's get into talking about logos. Most people don't know where this word comes from. So the definition of logo from Graphic Design, A New History, a wonderful book by Stephen J. Elkitson, is a logo is a visual symbol that serves as the identity marker for a brand, organization, or product. In this case, we have a representation for Findlay Market in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is supposed to be a farmer's market logo, and thus the cute little tomato in the middle. And it also sort of resembles something you might see stamped on the side of a crate. So we're playing on that whole aesthetic of something that is homegrown and bought directly from farmer to consumer. And that's what this aesthetic is going for. They also have a prominent use of the color red and green. Green has a connection to freshness, whereas red most of the time is associated with some kind of food or a passionate response. So you might say that this is also a depiction of how passionate the farmers are about growing food. You can look at more of this brand if you would like to click on this link right here. This is a brand by Eric Rutf. Next up, we have Caffeine Mania, which is a bobo bar and tea and coffee place. I really like the use of character in this particular logo, but let's talk a little bit about the elements of what makes a good logo. Number one is simplicity. So logos are designed to be readily recognizable and memorable at first glance. It needs to be versatile too, and so it needs to function across a lot of different platforms, whether that be in a print piece or on a giant sign or in a tiny little social media badge. They have to be meaningful. So effective logos will carry a symbolic meaning. In this case, it's really not something that you have to think about a whole lot. This is Mania Boba Bar is obviously playing upon a certain type of audience that might enjoy boba tea, which is very, very sweet. And so I think that this logo design is also very sweet. Timelessness is a good thing to think about when you're creating a logo, because it has to remain relevant. If you look at how many times major businesses, and we will later along in the slides here, look at how many times really large businesses have changed their logo design, you can see that even though brands evolve across time, it needs to remain authentic or perceived as authentic. We also have to be distinctive in our brand choices. So logos need to differentiate themselves from one another, not only because we want to buy a certain product from a certain group of people, but also because if it's not distinct enough from your competition or from the people who share your market, then you really haven't done your job. So here we have a very long evolution of a brand logo over time, starting from the 1890s all the way up until about 2018. And I still think that this is the most recent version of this logo. So Elkinson, again, Graphic Design, A New History, discusses logos in the context of the evolution of graphic design, noting their roots in early heraldic symbols or trademarks and their development of modern corporate identities, as seen with brands like IBM, Coca-Cola, and Apple, some of the brands that we've had around for a really long time. The older that a logo gets most of the time, the closer to it being something that looks like it was stamped on a giant crate, and that's really what trademark means. Now, it's different in the context of our current legal system. To get something trademarked is to protect your intellectual property from anyone else who would try to steal it, right? Well, before, trademark actually meant a mark of someone's trade. That was their distinction of brand recognition back when, we were still shipping things across the world, colonialism. So this is an evolution of the IBM logo over time, and as you can see, the symbology definitely changes. It gets increasingly reductive. It also evolves in typeface and in layout over time, and that is usually because styles change so much, and what might appeal to your audience will change so much as a brand sticks around for a long time. Let's take a look at the next one. And Coca-Cola, again, started in the 1800s with just a simple typeface design, and then we went to something that was a little bit more script-like. We got really scripty right up until the 1950s and 60s, and then we got really symbolic and reductive in 1985. And then we rolled it back into 87 because New Coke kind of crashed, actually. All of these are part of the same really large logo system that was designed by someone to create distinctiveness where Coca-Cola as a brand is concerned. That swoosh that happens throughout it is definitely supposed to be a SodaStream element, but script typefaces are associated with that golden era of graphic design that happened around the 1950s. They're associated with Americana brands. People's tastes change, the things that they are concerned about and think about change. And you might very well hate Coca-Cola, but it's a brand that's been around for a really long time. So it's interesting to watch it evolve and to think about what people were concerned about back then. Here's another long-standing logo. And this is the Apple logo. Look at this crazy thing at the very beginning on Apple Computer Co. I don't know if you know this, but Apple was based on a Newtonian idea. Yes, that's where that little apple comes from. It was supposed to be Steve Jobs' representation of the apple hitting Newton in the head, discovering gravity. I guess he saw himself as groundbreaking as Newton was. Personally, my favorite is the 1977 version, very happy, very rainbow version of this logo. And as you can see, this logo system has definitely evolved. It's became more symbolic and reductive, went through its Web 2.0 shiny, glossy phase, and then as increasingly become more of an Apple symbol to create that distinct brand. Beyond this, Apple does quite a lot of things with different color schemes and really clean typefaces to make this brand cohesive and come together. I just love to see the large distinction between this one and this one over since the 1970s. All right, so the main difference between these two, a reduction or lack of ornament. Remember we talked about ornament last time? So what is ornament? a celebration, elements, patterns, and visual complexity in contrast to minimalist and the functional approach to design. I think that design is going in an interesting direction because people enjoy so many crafts these days. And certainly we saw a resurgence of that in 2020 when everyone had to get a hobby. So I think that we're having a pushback on the clean technological aspect of modernism. But I don't know that we're going to go back this far. This is just a quick contrast between modernism and eclecticism. The two are not opposites, okay? I'm not saying that they are. It's just in order to move forward in design, we first have to understand what happened in the past. So let's discuss what some modernist ideas are. Modernism emphasized form followed function. So it rejected unnecessary decoration as superficial. Postmodernism, however, embraced ornament in terms of means of personal exploration. So it happens to be that these two have a contrast in core philosophy. So if you look at these posters, you can see the form follows function idea. The aesthetic is clean. The lines are minimal. We have geometric shapes. And it embraces industrial materials like steel, glass, concrete. And it was very influenced by the Bauhaus school, the same school that we were discussing last time. This is postmodernism, so it's eclecticism. Postmodern designs are often used ornamental elements drawn from diverse sources. Here, all of these are by a wonderful graphic designer called Paula Scheer. And these reference historical styles, pop culture, non-Western art forms, and is a very eclectic mix of styles. I'm not saying that this is better than that, or vice versa. It's just two different ways to think about and create design. And if you would like to read more about different graphic design styles, you can click on the link down here and visit this article. Let's highlight some interesting design styles over the years. By the way, this is not an authoritative list. So if you're looking for more design styles, definitely go check out some resources that I've linked online, or do some research for yourself. This is psychedelic design. Psychedelic design emerged in the 1960s. It has bold, vibrant colors, experimental styles, and let's just say it was probably under the influence of some pretty hallucinogenic drugs. It has vivid, vibrant colors, brightly saturated, that often clashed with each other. And we also have the reemergence of some hand-drawn typography. Now, this was a popular style during the French Art Nouveau movement. And you might say that this Nouveau movement was very similar to psychedelic design because they were both under the influence of drug, or in the other case, absinthe. So it has a lot of dream and fantastical elements that are often tied into nature, science fiction, and so on. Here's some more psychedelic design. You might recognize this band, Sgt. Pepper's and the Lonely Hearts Club Band. This has a direct influence, like I said, from Art Nouveau, has pop culture references, and it often included really bright, garish colors and optical illusions. Here's another example. This definitely looks very similar to a very famous artist in Art Nouveau called Alphonse Mucha. So if you really like curvilinear shapes, you might want to check out grunge. I'm glad to see the reemergence of 90s grunge. I think it is a really important and fun design style that emerged at that time. So here we have some very raw and distressed images, heavily textured things, dirty backgrounds. A very important publication for grunge is Grey Gun magazine. And we can't talk about grunge without talking about band posters. So we often have either these electric neon colors or muted earthy tones. We have layered and collaged elements. We have images and texture that are very distressed. So it rejects that beauty principle that had been the standard for design for so long, and also that perfectionism that came along with minimalism. So I'm going to correct myself. Grunge happened like around about the 80s and 90s, and here are some very influential albums that were definitely in this style. So it rejected commercial glossy styles of the early 80s and aligned itself with the rise of rebellious Generation X. Its influence can be seen in modern design trends that embrace imperfection, authenticity, and very raw aesthetic. So that wraps up this section of Lecture 2, Color Spaces, Logos, and Styles. Next time, we will definitely be talking about more styles and also typography. So I look forward to seeing you soon.